welcome to a brand new episode of Brewing with 50 bucks. This is the show where we take a commander, we'll slap on a $50 budget range, and we'll build a deck around it that's not only functional, but has the ability to win. My name is Stefan, I'm coming to you from the General Warfare headquarters. I just want to give you a very big apology for last week. I had a video out and ready for you. It's just unfortunately, I had a family issue that I had to take care of, and because of that, the video never ended up coming out. So I'm actually trying to make up for it today. I ended up posting a small little small little thing on TikTok to decide what was the next commander I was going to talk about in today's video. And my links to TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are going to be on the bottom left-hand side of your screen right now. And today's commander that was chosen by you guys is Orcus, Prince of Undeath. So I built this deck kind of as a value / aristocrat style deck. Orcus is flexible enough that he can either get rid of all the creatures you don't want on the field, or he can get the creatures you have in your graveyard back into play. How this deck functions is very closely akin to sacrificing your creatures for value and getting them back with Orcus and other reanimating styles. And yes, there's two combos in this deck, obviously, because red and black don't have enough fun stuff in it already. So with that, let's get started. Let's take a look at Orcus together, shall we? All right, so Orcus, Prince of Undeath, is a 5/3 for X2 black and red legendary demon with flying and trample. And when Orcus, Prince of Undeath, enters the battlefield, choose one. You either each other creature gets -X until end of turn, and you lose X life, or you return up to X target creature cards with total mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. They gain haste until end of turn. So, without sounding like a broken record, this deck is basically an aristocrat style deck where the majority of the deck is functioning as aristocrat style. However, Orcus itself is not a prime component to the strategy. Orcus is there to give you some extra value. You either get to board wipe and relieve your opponents of creatures, or you get back your combo pieces basically in this deck, or your main utility value, leave the battlefield triggered creatures and such back to your field, and they gain haste until end of turn. Orcus is there to accompany the deck, not so much be the centerfold for the combos. And yes, we are running combos in this deck, as mentioned before. And as always, we're running this deck with a $50 budget, which will include the price of the commander, exclude the total cost of basic lands, and for these kind of brews, we also offer a $5 overage lenience, since most people could build a deck with for 50 bucks, and they have an extra $5 to add to the budget itself. If you like this video or you like these kind of series, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, hit that bell icon to be notified of every single video that comes out of the channel. The deck list and my socials will be linked in the show notes down below. We are going through 9 categories today. We're going to get started with our enter the battlefield triggers. So these are the main components to our deck. This is what we're going to get a lot of the value coming into the field. We're going to start off with Combustible Gear Hulk, a 6/6 for 6 mana with first strike. When it enters the battlefield, you get to either have target opponent may have you draw 3 cards, but if they don't, you mill 3 cards, and then the Gear Hulk will deal damage equal to the total mana value of those cards. A lot of the times this usually whiffs. However, Combustible Gear Hulk either nets you 3 extra cards in your hand or dealing damage to your opponent. So why not get that extra value on there? Fleshbag Marauder, Plague Crafter, and Merciless Executioner all come into the same ability. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. They vary in price, and they also vary in power and toughness, with Merciless Executioner and Fleshbag Marauder being 3/1s and Plague Crafter being a 3/2. But Plague Crafter allows everybody to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, and each player who can't discards a card. So a little bit of extra value on top of that. Next, we're looking at Grey Merchant of Asphodel, or Gary for short. When Gary enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is the devotion to black that you have, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So Gary is usually a game-ending card, and a lot of the times you want to manipulate this, especially if you're playing a very heavy black deck, like this deck is. Next, we're looking at Massacre Girl. For a 4/4 for 5 with Menace, and when it enters the battlefield, each other creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn. This is one of our only other board wipes that we have in this deck next to Orcus. Since she gives -1/-1 counters, this gets around both Indestructible and it gets around Hexproof, so you're not actually targeting the creatures, you're just giving them -1/-1 counters. That way, whenever their toughness hits 0, they're dead. Next, we're looking at Meteor Golem, a 7 mana 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Murderous Redcap allows you to deal damage equal to its power to any target when it enters the battlefield, and it has Persist, one of the 2 persist cards that I have in this deck. Puppeteer Click, when it enters the battlefield, you put target creature card from an opponent's graveyard on the battlefield under your control. Gains haste, and at the beginning of your next end step, you exile it, and it comes in with Persist as well. So Puppeteer Click is a very good card, considering how you're able to steal creatures from your opponents every time it enters the battlefield. So whenever, and with the Persist ability, you're doing, when it dies, it comes back with a -1/-1 counter. When it dies again, it goes to the graveyard. You could just get Orcus to get Puppeteer Click on the back of the battlefield without that Persist, so you're stealing more creatures from your opponents. Next, we're looking at Ravenous Chupacabra. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. Shriekmaw does the exact same thing, except it's terror on a creature. You destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature with Evoke 1 and a black. And lastly, we're looking at both Siege Gang Commander and Sling Gang Lieutenant. Both of them enter the battlefield and create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Siege Gang Commander allows you to create 3. Sling Gang Lieutenant allows you to create 2. The difference is in their activated abilities. Siege Gang Commander, for 1 red, you sacrifice a goblin. Siege Gang Commander deals 2 damage to any target. So this includes the Siege Gang Commander and Sling Gang Lieutenant, so since they're both goblins. And you can deal 2 damage to any target, whereas Sling Gang, you don't have to pay an activated cost. You just sacrifice a goblin, target player loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. Next, we're going to be looking at our Leave the Battlefield triggers. So this is whenever a creature leaves the battlefield, these abilities trigger. So we're going to start off with Anax, Hardened in the Forge, a star 3, 1 and a red, where his power is equal to the devotion to red. And whenever Anax or another non-token creature you control dies, you create a 1/1 red satyr creature where it can't block. And if its power is 4 or greater, you create 2 of them instead. Pretty good value since you're getting more creatures to sack for fodder this way. Falkenroth Noble, very known card. Whenever it or another creature dies, your target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is the most budget-friendly version of this card that we can play in this deck with the priced amount that we have. Impulsive Pliffler allows you to create a treasure token when it dies, and you get to encore it with 3 and a red for each opponent, create a token copy that attacks an opponent this turn if able. So each time one of these Pliffler tokens die, basically you're getting extra treasure tokens depending on how many opponents you have on the field. Mayhem Devil, whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, it deals 1 damage to any target. Midnight Reaper, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, it deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. Open the Graves for 3 black, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Serrated Scorpion, when it dies, you deal 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. Sir Conrad is a great card for these kinds of decks. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and for 1 and a black, each player mills a card. Vindictive Vampire is similar to Falkenroth Noble, except having 1 extra toughness. And Zulaport Cutthroat is another staple card. When another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Next, we're going to take a look at our 6 draw cards in this deck. We're going to start off with Cathartic Reunion. At the additional cost, and you discard 2 cards, you draw 3 cards. Greed allows you to pay black and 2 life to draw a card, which is very, very simple because it can be done at instant speed. Read the Bones for sorcery, scry 2, draw 2, and then lose 2. Sign in Blood allows you to draw 2 and lose 2 life. Thrill of Possibilities, at an instant, allows you to discard a card and draw 2 cards. And Village Rites allows you to draw 2 cards at the expense of sacrificing a creature as an additional cost. Next, we're going to look at our combo cards. I'll be explaining each one of the combos as we go through them. So we're going to start off with Edric Sar, Grinning Angus, and Thermopod. How this combo works is you have to have Edric Sar and Thermopod on the field. You play Grinning Angus. Edric Sar will create 3 1/1 black thrall creature tokens. With that, you sacrifice all 3 of them to the Thermopod to use Grinning Angus's ability. So you're having 3 red. You use 1 of them to return Grinning Angus to its owner's hand, and you add 1 red and 2 colorless. You activate it as a sorcery, and you can keep going on, and you're getting infinite leave the battlefield, enter the battlefield triggers, infinite red mana, infinite storm count, anything you can fix on that. And the second combo running is not so much a infinite combo, it's just a 2-card instant win combo nearly. It's Havoc Festival and Wound Reflection. So this is probably the most high costing combo between the two, having a total mana value of 11 between both cards. How this works is you have to have both on the field. Beginning of each end step, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player loses half their life rounded up, and then at their end step they lose life equal to the life they lost this turn. So you have to maintain having Havoc Field and Wound Reflection on the field, and it could be very tricky considering this could kill your opponents very, very quickly if they can't interact or they can't remove either one of the combo pieces. Next, we're going to be looking at our token creators. So we're going to start off with Dreadhorde Invasion, which allows you to lose 1 life and amass 1, where amass is you put a +1/+1 counter on an army you control. If you don't control one, you create a 0/0 black zombie army creature token first, and then put the +1/+1 counter on it. And then whenever a zombie token you control with power 6 or greater attacks, it gains lifelink until end of turn. We're not going to focus too much on the second ability. It's the lose 1 and amass 1 we're going to be focusing more on, considering we're going to be using the zombie tokens as fodder for sacrifice outlets and such. Next, we'll look at our sack engines. We're going to start with Carrion Feeder, a 1 black mana for a 1/1 where it can't block. Sacrifice a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on Carrion Feeder. With this, you can sacrifice creatures at instant speed, and the fact that you can avoid them getting killed or having any extra value from your opponents. This way, with Carrion Feeder, you just nullify any kind of tricks they may have up their sleeve. Vampiric Rites for a 1 black and mana enchantment, where 1 and a black, sacrifice a creature, you gain 1 life and draw a card. And last is Whisper Blood Liturgist, 3 and a black for a 2/2 legendary human cleric, to tap and sacrifice 2 creatures to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So we're going to take a look at our extra cards. These extra cards are from categories which we haven't talked about, or cards that were part of the categories that we haven't talked about before. We're going to start off with Command the Dreadhorde, where for 6 mana you get to choose any number of target creatures and planeswalkers in graveyards, not just your own, but graveyards in general. And you get to put them onto the battlefield under your control at the account of Command the Dreadhorde dealing damage to your equal to the total converted mana cost of those cards. Tortured Existence allows you to play a black and choose and discard a creature card to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Victimize allows you to sacrifice a creature and return 2 chosen target creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then we're looking at Burning Rune Demon, where with this, you get to search your library for exactly 2 cards not named Burning Rune Demon that have different names. If you do, reveal those cards. An opponent chooses one of them, put the chosen card into your hand and the other into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. The fact this is on a creature and it's repeatable enter the battlefield abilities is really, really good. This is also the budget version of Runescarred Demon, so if you have a little bit more money, I would personally put Runescarred Demon in instead of Burning Rune Demon. However, in this case, we're going to be running with it. And since you get to exploit the enter the battlefield and tutor up to 2 cards, you have to be very careful as to what you're getting if you're going for one of your combo pieces. You have to be very careful to balance them out to where your opponent might want to choose one over the other. Diabolic Tutor is a staple card where you get to search your library for a card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. It's the basic budget tutor. And Mausoleum Secrets, a 1 and a black instant tutor where you get to search your library for a black card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. You reveal it and put it into your hand, then you shuffle your library. So with this, effectively, you're only going to be searching for a black card with the limited converted mana cost of the number of creatures you have in your graveyard. So do this before you recur any of your creatures. Yeah, and the small cost is you're revealing the card as well. Outpost Siege is one of our main advantage keys. With this, you get to exile the top card of your library. We're mostly going to be using the Khan's ability for this, and until end of turn, you may play that card. Although Dragons could help in the short game. If it's near the end of the game and you want some extra damage, you basically get to use Dragons to use it as a leave the battlefield trigger and deal damage to any target. Rakdos Slaughter Riots is one of our bigger bombs in the deck with flying and trample. And you can't cast it. The only limitation, you can't cast it unless an opponent lost life this turn, which in this deck is not that difficult to do. And creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each 1 life your opponent has lost this turn, which is a very good caveat. The one removal that we have in this deck, and yes, I know how shameful of me not to put more removal in black and red since there's a lot of it, is Chaos Warp. However, in the interim, we're running a lot of combo pieces. We're running a lot of synergy. So, and considering the fact we are running a couple of cards that already kill creatures on site and permanents on site is not a big deal. Chaos Warp allows you to shuffle a permanent into their owner's library and then reveal the top card of their library. If it's a permanent, put it into the battlefield. Perpetual Timepiece allows you to mill the top 2 cards of your library to put in your graveyard, and you exile the timepiece to shuffle it any number of cards from your graveyard into your library. This is used as a self-mill strategy, so where you want to get more and more cards into your graveyard so that you recur more and more creatures from your graveyard onto the battlefield. And in the event that your opponent is trying to exile your entire graveyard, you get to use the timepiece, exile it, and you shuffle it back into your graveyard, into your library, I should say. Song of the Damned allows you to get some extra mana for each creature card in your graveyard. It's 1 extra black for each creature card. Some utility cards we're running is Chainer Nightmare Adept, where you get to discard a card and you get to cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn, only activate it once a turn, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until end of turn. So what if you have Chainer and then you play Orcus and get back a lot of creatures, they all have haste until end of turn, and then Shadows of the Past, whenever a creature dies, you scry 1, so it's not limited to your creatures or non-token creatures. Any creature dies, scry 1, and for 4 and a black, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Activate this ability only if there are 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard. And then we are running 3 steel cards, Active Treason, where you get to gain control of target creature until end of turn and tap it and gains haste. Claim the Firstborn, where you get to gain control of a creature that's mana value 3 or less until end of turn. And then Mob Rule, where you get to gain control of either all creatures with power 4 or greater or power 3 or less until end of turn. Now we're going to take a look at our ramping cards. So we're going to start off with Firemind Vessel for 4 mana and enters the battlefield tapped. However, we get to add 2 mana of different colors. Mind Stone allows you to tap for a colorless and type 1 and tap it to sack it to draw a card. Rakdos Cluestone allows you to tap it for a black or a red, or you tap both and tap the Rakdos Cluestone to draw a card. Rakdos Lock is the same thing, except you tap a combination of red or black and sacrifice the locket to draw 2 cards. Rakdos Signet is a staple no matter what. 2 mana to tap 1 and mana fix you. Seething Song, instant for 2 and a red, which adds you 5 red mana onto your field. Shambling Gas allows you to create a treasure token when it dies. Soul Ring, strong card. 1 mana tap 2 to make 2 colorless. And lastly, our lands, which we'll do very quickly. Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse. Same cards, allowing you to search your library for a basic land card and put it into the battlefield tapped and shuffle. Mirrored Landscape allows you to do that, but twice fold, since it gets 2 basic lands that share a land type. Witch's Cottage comes into play untapped as long as you have 3 or more other swamps. When it enters the battlefield, you get to put a target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. And we're also running 16 swamps and 16 mountains. And that's how you build a demon that defies death and drags the dead back to their domain. Our deck price today, with our $50 budget to this deck, including the $1 price of Orcus and excluding the total amount from the basic lands, comes to a deck price of $50.50, which is extremely on point with our budget, slightly over at 50 cents, but everybody can afford an extra 50 cents to build this deck. This deck is very functional. This deck actually works quite a bit. I've play tested a couple of times, and we'll get into the pros and cons of how I felt this deck runs. So we'll be looking over some pros and cons to this deck. Some of the pros that I found in this deck is that it's a very synergy heavy deck, since there's a lot of interaction between cards entering the battlefield, cards leaving the battlefield, and a lot of value in between. So from either destroying a lot of creatures, getting some card draw, making opponents lose life, anything, and you name it. It's pretty much there. It's very synergy heavy. There's no shortage of tokens or draw in this deck, since and there's a few cards allow you to draw cards, and there's cards that just let you rummage. And there's a lot of token generation in this deck, allowing you to have fodder in the event your opponents want to start swinging at you. And it's very reliable in terms of hits and wipes with Orcus, since, like I was mentioning at the beginning of this video, Orcus is just a key player in this deck. He's not the main component. So if ever he's needed, you get to wipe an entire field for however much mana you could produce, and this deck ramps very, very hard. Or you get to return all the creatures that you have in your graveyard back to the battlefield. Some of the cons in this deck is there's no instant speed removal, apart from maybe Chaos Warp, but other than that, there's no real spot removal, direct target removal that is not outside of a creature. You can get very overloaded during draws, and you can dirtle through turns, since there's a lot of cards that have the exact same effect, and you want to be very strategic with this deck. Since this is not a very beginner-friendly deck, you want to be very cautious, you want to be very keen as to what you're playing each turn. And very much so, it could be very slow to start. I've tested this deck enough to the point where you can actually stall out, and you got to either get mana flooded or mana screwed, and you're not going to be doing too much with Orcus. And some out of budget recommendations I would put for this deck is Black Market, since anytime a creature dies, you put a charge counter on Black Market, and your pre-combat main phase, you're adding black mana to each charge counter on Black Market. Pitiless Plunder, anytime a creature is dying, you're putting a treasure token on the field. Yes, Chatterfang did make this card spike in price, and yes, this is a very, very strong card. Yet, yeah, this is a good card if you want to go out of budget for. Entomb is always a good, reliable card, especially in graveyard recursion decks like this. And Torment of Hailfar is another win con in this deck. If you have the money to put it in this deck. And I'm going to leave it off here today, guys. I just want to know from you, how do you feel with today's build? Is there a commander you're dying to look at a $50 budget range? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you found enjoyment from this video, don't hesitate to give this video a like and a subscribe. Hit that bell icon to be notified of every future video coming out. But not only would I appreciate the sub, this will also help the channel grow. So it would be an utmost of appreciation if you did give this a video a subscribe. I post every Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's how I'm going to be hitting every one of you in the East Coast and the West Coast early enough in the morning so you guys can watch it. And if you want to get in touch with me somehow for either a future video or a future idea for a deck brew, hit me up on my socials. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram. Links in the bottom left of your screen right now. And like I said, I'm going to leave it off here. So thank you guys for watching the entire video in its entirety. I truly appreciate it. I apologize one last time for last week's video. I hope today made it up for it, and I'm going to see you guys next week. So until then, cheers everybody.